welcome to our virtual tasting tonight. Happy Wednesday to everybody. It's hump day. Perfect time to have our first spirits tasting on this program of the year. We started out our virtual tastings in April, and tonight I'm really excited to announce is our 50th show since April 16th. And it is fitting that we are hosting not just a spirits brand, but an iconic spirits brand, Jack Daniel's, a Tennessee whiskey and the top selling American whiskey in the world. So, you know, we're starting big, and we're excited about that. So welcome everybody. Please feel free to hit us up in the Q&A panel in Zoom at the bottom of your screen, and we will answer as many questions as we can throughout the session, along the way, on the fly. And also, as always, hit us up now in the chat and let us know where in the world you are tuning in from. We love to hear from you guys and hear where everybody's located. With that, I am going to get back to talking about this awesome brand, and we're going to get started. So when I said a big brand, I wasn't kidding. Check this out. Jack Daniel's, the Black Label Tennessee whiskey, which is the iconic traditional one, sells 13 million cases of whiskey per year. And the other brand variations, such as Tennessee Honey, Gentleman Jack, Tennessee Fire, and others, sell another 4 million cases a year. So it's a really iconic and big brand, and we're excited to be doing an entire show on Jack Daniel's. I think it's only fitting, though, that we kick off the show with a message from the chairman of the board. Not of the chairman of the board of the company that owns Jack Daniel's, but the chairman of the board, Frank Sinatra. Frank had some choice words for Jack Daniel's, which was a favorite of his. So let's listen to Frank.
Thank you. I'm looking good and I'm feeling pretty good too. I got news for you. And you'll never believe it, but I've been trying to skip rope. You ever try that? You lift into the room like that after a while. But I do take pretty good care of my swim every day, punch a large sandbag, heavy bag, and do some sitting up exercises, stuff like that. And then I go to bed for 3 days, and I get up again. And I drink a half a bottle of Jack Daniel's at night, and everything's the same. Right? That's the nectar of the gods, baby. From Lynchburg, Tennessee, that comes from, where the water tastes like cherry wine. Where I come from in New Jersey, the water tastes like turpentine. I could talk about that steak now. We made up. We're friends again, so you don't have to worry about it.
All right, well said, Frank. That's a classic. We couldn't help but play that for you. So I want to move on to our esteemed guest tonight. It is not every week that we have such an august personality on the show. He's been in the bar business since the 90s. He now serves as the U.S. brand ambassador for Jack Daniel's. He's a bartender by trade, and he now travels the world talking about whiskey and how to cater to cocktail enthusiasts like all of you who are watching and give them the best experience. He brings a completely unparalleled amount of knowledge about Jack Daniel's, about cocktail making, and some really, really interesting history behind this brand. So it's really a pleasure to welcome E.T. Tecosky. E.T., thank you so much for being on the show tonight.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
What brought you initially into your role as the U.S. brand ambassador for Jack Daniel's?
You know, look, there's a lot of people that work in the spirits business, and sometimes it's a job that you see on Monster or a recruiter and you go get the job. for me, Jack, I was already there, and it really was music that brought me to Jack. It was my parents. My dad was all Sinatra all the time, and my mom basically bred me in vitro, in utero to rock and roll. And um, both those worlds meet at Jack. So when I was old enough to drink, it was the bottle I reached for. And to be honest, you get older, you can make your own decisions, and then the whiskey in the bottle just kept had me go back for more. When I got into the bar business, I was working in LA, and all the local reps knew how much of a fan I was of Jack Daniels, and they were late to the game, having ambassadors and people like that going out and speaking for the brand. And an opportunity came up to host a dinner, and they asked me if I would do it. And that just led to another job and another thing and another thing. And eventually they just figured it'd be easier to hire me. And I became the first ambassador for Jack Daniels.
So you actually, you're in your position, you basically created the role. I mean, there was no brand ambassador before you did it.
Yeah, we had ambassadors like our master distillers or Jack Daniels great grandees that would go around and speak on behalf of the brand, but in the traditional sense of a advocate for the brand, who comes from the bar world or the service industry, they didn't have anyone like that. And the role came about, and we just kind of kept fine tuning and fine tuning and fine tuning. And look, for me, it's a dream job. I come from the bar world. I've owned bars, I've ran bars, I've worked in and around cocktails since pre-cocktail revolution, when we were still using neon maraschino cherries and bottled sour mixes, to when everything is now handmade. And it's been fun to transition, but it's also been fun to see brands like Jack Daniels just kind of come along for the ride, because they've always been here. So they're always going to be here.
Got it. And what's your favorite part of the job?
The free samples. The it's really, look, being on the road a lot can be challenging, but it's incredible to get to go around the country and go to other countries and meet people, and those people become friends, and then they become people that you go see again on your next visit. So I would say the people I get to meet and hearing stories from all over the world is probably the best part of the job.
That's cool. All right, so we're gonna jump shortly into cocktail mixing, which I'm really excited about. I can't believe how delicious this cocktail that we're making tonight is. But I do have a trivia question. This is just my own personal curiosity, because I know from having learned a little bit about the company and the brand. Is it true that Jack Daniels, in its home county of Moore County, Tennessee, that the product is not available for purchase in stores or restaurants?
True, true. So Tennessee as a state went dry pre-prohibition, and then when prohibition hit the U.S., obviously they were already dry. And when we came out of prohibition, Jack's nephew actually had to petition the state to reopen the distillery, but they never allowed for the sale of alcohol in bars or in restaurants or anything like that. And to this day, we say dry county, but I would say it's a moist county. There's a winery that's allowed to sell their own wine. I think a restaurant now has a beer license, and we're allowed to sell the product at the distillery, but there are no bars, and there is no Jack Daniels for sale at any restaurant.
In the entire county. That's so
Yeah.
interesting.
Look, Moore County itself, Lynchburg is the town Jack is in, and the Lynchburg town itself, I think, is only still about 600 people. In Moore County, there's probably about 5. It's the second smallest county in Tennessee.
Is that right? Yeah, interesting. All right, so should we make a cocktail? Should we make Wednesday night the official night of the Sunset Strip cocktail?
Works for me. Works for me. Yeah, let's do it. I will say this cocktail's pretty simple to make. Some of the ingredients sound, you know, like maybe someone hasn't heard of them. Pamplemousse is just the French word for grapefruit. So pamplemousse is just grapefruit liqueur. So let's get ahead of ourselves. And I have bar tools because I come from bartending. If you don't have bar tools, that shouldn't deter you from making a good drink at home. This is a bar measuring jigger, so different measurements. If you don't have one of these, but you cook and you have a tablespoon is a half ounce. So if I
Yeah.
say something's 1.5 ounces, that's just 3 tablespoons. And then you can go up and down from there. This drink's pretty simple, just
Let
3
me
ingredients.
interject really quickly. I want to ask everybody watching, all of you who are viewing now, how many of you have actually got the ingredients, some or all of the ingredients for the cocktail? Because I know we sent that out with information about the event tonight. So just hit us in the chat, let us know. We do have a question from AC, which is, can they use Contratto instead of Aperol? That's a really interesting question, actually. Not a lot of people know Contratto. It's actually an Italian liqueur. Can you use that instead of Aperol?
I will say this, you can use anything instead of anything. That's the fun of making cocktails. This cocktail, it's called Sunset Boulevard, but it's based on a drink called a Boulevardier, which is just another hard word to look at and say. But all that is a whiskey Negroni. And I'm sure most people have heard of a Negroni, which is just gin, Campari, and sweet vermouth. So for this drink, as a Boulevardier, the whiskey is going to be Jack Daniels. Instead of Campari, we're going to use Campari's sweeter, younger cousin, Aperol. And then for sweet vermouth, we're using the grapefruit liqueur. So you could make a Boulevardier if you have those ingredients. You could sub out anything I'm doing. My golden rule is this, there's no rules. It's just like cooking, right? When your grandma says a pinch, it might actually be a 1/4 ounce. It might actually be a 1/2 ounce. You just don't know until you make it. So whatever tastes good for you is good, because if you like it, it's a good drink.
So I'm just going to say to AC, AC, go ahead and use the Contratto. By the way, Contratto is amazing. It's the least known of those special Italian liqueurs. So absolutely, you can substitute.
Awesome. So like I said, super simple drink. I'm going to use a mixing glass. If you don't have one of these, get a pint glass. A lot of bartenders just use pint glasses to mix drinks. A little bit of a side note, this drink is all alcohol. Rule of thumb in a bar, if it's all alcohol, you stir. If there's heavy syrups and juices, you shake. However, because the grapefruit liqueur is a little bit heavier, if you want to shake this drink, that's fine. If you want to take a pint glass, a solo cup, and some ice, feel free. You don't need fancy tools. You don't need fancy glassware. It's all going to taste the same. So we're going to do 1.25 ounces of Old No. 7. I do a little extra just because of the sweet of the pamplemousse and a little bit of the Aperol. So just 1.25 ounces of good old Jack Daniels. And then equal parts, 1 ounce of Aperol and pamplemousse. So it looks very similar to Campari. Just a little bit lighter, a little bit brighter. Has some of the same bitter note, but masked with a little bit of citrus. And then pamplemousse. There's tons of brands out there. Became popular a few years ago. So any grapefruit liqueur will work.
I think you have the same one I have. Is that what you have?
Oh yeah, you have a newer bottle. Look at you, fancy.
Yeah. Well, I had to go out and get it today.
All right, and just fill your glass up with ice. And again, you don't need tools to do this. You can make this in a coffee mug. Stir it. Now you do want to stir or shake till it's cold. That water is going to help tie all the flavors together.
Yeah, you mentioned that in the recipe, that dilution of the water from the melting ice actually helps this drink, and it's a nuance, but you make it like you're making it now, and then you pour it out, and then over new ice, right?
Right, and I'll even let it sit while we're answering that. Dilution is important to almost every cocktail. You shake a margarita, right? You stir an old fashioned. You shake a gimlet. So all of that is adding 15, 20, sometimes more water. So let's say it adds 20% of water to a drink that already had 4 ingredients. Now it's a lot of water, right? So you really need that sometimes to marry all the flavors together, to brighten up some things, to lighten up some things. But over dilution can sometimes obviously hurt you. So, but this drink can sustain a little bit of dilution. Now, Fill another glass with ice or an ice cube if you have it. And then strain it right over that ice. And then I use a grapefruit peel. I feel like a little bit of those oils. Now, if you ever see a bartender take a peel and twist it, you want the oils that come off that twist to go into your drink, because that's going to give you some nice aromas when you're bringing it to your mouth. And then sometimes I give it a little, how you doing around the rim here, just so you really get that grapefruit.
Yeah.
So if everyone has that drink or their drink they made at home, maybe we'll do our first toast. May you be as cool as your dog thinks you are. Cheers.
Cheers. I tell you, man, that's a dangerous concoction because it is delicious.
Yeah, it's a good. I enjoy it. It's you're drinking, but it's a nice sipping drink. It's not too one way or the other.
It almost has, and I mean this in the best way. It's almost got like a dessert quality to it. It's just
yeah,
it's
it has
delicious.
A little bit of a sweetness. Some of the bitter from the Aperol comes through. The Jack is there. You get that grapefruit. Dan Gazzetta likes it. That's always a plus.
Yes.
But yeah, no, I'm a fan. And Sunset Strip, there's a lot of Jack happily consumed there over the years, so it's a fitting name for Jack Daniels.
I think Frank Sinatra consumed some Jack on the Sunset Strip.
Yep.
In the day. And question, we didn't have a grapefruit, so we did a twist of a lemon.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where any citrus is going to kind of give you. Sometimes, every once in a while, you'll use a citrus that doesn't work on a cocktail, and you know right away it didn't work. But lemons and Jack Daniels have a very good relationship. Oranges, grapefruits, lemons. Limes can be used. They're a little trickier for cocktails like this, but overall, when it calls for citrus, citrus is citrus in some regards.
So we've got our Sunset Strip cocktail. I would love to take a little detour into the rich history and tradition of Jack Daniels. It's such a rich history. It goes back a long way. For those of us who are vaguely familiar with the brand but don't know the history, what is the story of Jack Daniels? Because it's quite a story.
Yeah, look, I feel like you read the last page of the book, right? Jack Daniels is this giant brand, millions of cases all over the world. But let's start at the first page. And really, Jack was a real person. A lot of people think someone invented that and we just put a bunch of money behind it. But Jack Daniel was a real person, and he was born around 1850. That's what's on his tombstone that his nephew built. But his mom, I think, passed away in 1848. So it's highly unlikely that he was born in 1850. So I don't know, just like the round number, records weren't that good back then. And he was the youngest of 10 kids. And when his mom passed away, his dad remarried. And, some records show that maybe him and his stepmom didn't get along that great. And then his father passed away. And he wasn't loving things at home. They had 3 more children. Now he wasn't the baby. And he just had that spirit that wanted to move. So, around 8 years old, which sounds crazy now, Jack left home and he went and worked and lived on the Dan Call farm. Now, Dan Call lived a few miles away, which in the mid 1800s is far.
That's far.
And, Dan at the time, him and his wife only had 2 daughters. So back then people had a lot of kids because there was a lot of chores. So only having 2 children wasn't great. So Jack went and tried to help out, around the farm, around the house. Dan had a general store, and Jack was helping everywhere. And over time, Dan realized Jack was kind of a hustler. So one day after work, he said, "Jack, come with me." And they went down to the creek where Dan Call had some guys making whiskey right next to the creek. So Jack was immediately enamored with this whiskey making process. And at the time, this is early to mid to just over mid 1800s. There was Dan Call had some slaves. One of these enslaved men was a guy named Nearest Green, and he was known throughout that area to be a great distiller. So he entrusted Nearest Green to teach, 9, 10-year-old Jack Daniels how to make whiskey. And Jack and Nearest became very close friends, and Jack absorbed it all. Now, as another side hustle, Dan Call was also becoming a Lutheran minister. So at some point, he came home one day, and this is the only thing I'm going to tell you where it's slightly embellished. His wife was rocking on the front porch and arms crossed, and basically said, "We need to have a talk." And anyone who's married knows you don't want your wife to tell you we need to have a
Yeah.
talk.
That's
It's
not what you
never,
want to find when you come home, is the
no,
wife in the rocking chair on the front porch
yeah,
saying we have to talk.
it never ends with "I won the lottery." Trust me. So she basically said, "Look, you're a man of God. You're a spiritual leader for this area, and you also make whiskey. So basically, choose a spirit." So, Dan Call chose Happy Wife, Happy Life, and he sold his still to young Jack Daniel for about $25 on credit. And at the time, Jack was 13 years old. So here's 13-year-old Jack running a business. Now I remember 13-year-old for me, and I was not running a business. If I'm being honest, I was running after Stacy Savidov, who kept, avoiding my love. And but if you see her now from
Yeah.
Atlantic City, New Jersey,
Listen, Stacy missed out, and she could have
exactly.
been with the brand ambassador for Jack Daniels.
Right. But Jack, Jack was running his business. And the first thing he did, slavery had ended by this point. The first thing Jack did was hired Nearest Green as Jack's head distiller, which we would probably call a master distiller today. So, as far as we know, Nearest Green was the first ever African American master distiller, which is crazy talk when you're thinking about the time period. And, they kept business as usual. And they kept making whiskey. Jack would go out and sell it and go to neighboring towns, horse and buggy, and sell this whiskey. And it was growing. I mean, Jack didn't see success like we have it today, but in his time, he was very, very successful. And one of the main ingredients for making whiskey is water. And a
Mm-hmm.
few miles away from the Call farm, there was a cave spring, and Jack found it. It was up for sale, and he went and checked it out and realized this water was great for making whiskey. And he rented the land and then eventually bought the land. That cave, which is in the back of that picture, you see that Jack statue. There's a cave opening behind it. That cave is still the same cave where we pull all the water that makes Jack Daniels today. The same place Jack found as a teenager and bought. And what's amazing about that cave is it's 100% limestone. And limestone is a natural filter for iron, and you need iron-free water to make whiskey. So Jack found a natural source of iron-free water. That cave is also inside the cave. It's 56 degrees any single day of the year. So if it's 104 in Lynchburg summers, it's 56 in that cave. If
Is
it's,
this the cave here? I just put it on everybody's
yeah,
screen.
that's the inside of the cave. So that's always the same temperature year round. So when it's
50,
hot,
no matter when it's 97 degrees in Tennessee in the summertime, it's
or
56 in this cave.
or minus 10 in the winter. So,
Wow.
and that's really optimal for making whiskey as well. So Jack really, was very fortunate to find that cave, and that's still, like I said, the same source of water that we use today. And so, as he's building his brand and the brand is growing and he's trying to branch out as much as he can, he started letting his nephew Lem and Dickie Daniel, kind of run the distillery as Jack got older. And as Jack got older, he was more of the face of the brand, right? You'd see him go around and glad hand and sell whiskey and this and that. He owned 2 saloons, the Red Dog and the White Rabbit, in the town square. He sponsored a local band, which we like to think is where the music connection started, called the Silver Coronet Band. And he would have them play outside these 2 saloons and bring people from all over the county to come check out the music and check out his saloons. And, you know, when Jack passed away in, um, later in his life, he was a relatively young man. He was 61. Um, So he passed away in 1911. Now, real quick, before we move on, can anyone guess the murder weapon that killed Jack Daniels? Anyone in the chat know the murder weapon that killed Jack Daniels?
Everybody's like looking it up on Wikipedia right now.
There you go. Yeah.
Wow.
Nice. It was
Jason, good one.
Yeah, it was a safe. It was a safe. So murder might be a strong word, but as Jack got older and he was having his nephews kind of do the day-to-day business, Jack came to the office early one day and hadn't really opened up for a while. So he was trying to open up the safe, and oh, nice, Tennessee Squire. I'm a Squire as well, so welcome to the show. He couldn't remember the combination to the safe. So he kept trying and kept getting more and more frustrated. And finally, like most men would do, they kick this giant steel safe thinking that's going to open it. And he ended up breaking his toe. That is the actual safe. And it's still in his office today. He broke his toe, stubborn, didn't go to the doctor. Eventually that caused a blood infection, and that's what killed Jack Daniel.
Wow.
So the moral of the story is never go to work early, kill yourself. But, so after Jack passed, his nephews that were kind of taken over already took over full operation of the distillery. And unfortunately for them, Prohibition had already hit by the time Jack passed, 1909 in Tennessee. So they were in a dry county, and they had to go fend for themselves and try to figure out how to make a living during this time out. And eventually Prohibition ended, and Lem Motlow, Jack's nephew, really fought hard to get Tennessee to allow them to make whiskey again. And eventually they did. And he started making Jack Daniels. Tiny little brand, tiny brand, only distributed in like a quarter of the country, if that, back then.
And this is when Prohibition ended, yeah?
Yeah, so after Prohibition ended, it took a few years to make whiskey, right? Because you can't just make it and sell it the next day. It's got to age. And eventually, they reopened. Now, what they did do, Jack Daniels is called Tennessee whiskey. Most people know bourbon. That's the American spirit. Tennessee whiskey is a very, very close cousin of bourbon. There's only one production difference between Tennessee whiskey and bourbon. By law, Jack Daniels follows every single production step of bourbon, meaning must be made in the United States. Okay. It has to be at least 80 proof. It must be aged in new white oak charred barrels. There's some proofing laws you don't care about, but all of the things that is bourbon is Jack Daniels, except for one. Jack was taught by Nearest, who was taught by someone else, about charcoal mellowing. And that is a process. Nice. Charcoal mellowing, charcoal filtering, the Lincoln County process, all of it's the same thing. If you've ever seen a Brita filter, like a water filter, your tap water goes through charcoal filter, and charcoal removes impurities and minerals that you don't want in that drinking water. For whiskey, it's very, very similar. Jack Daniel, what he was looking for in the finished product, didn't have so much of that grainy nose and grainy corn taste. It also had a little bit of a sweeter finish. That's an actual charcoal mellowing vat. So what we do is we make by hand at the distillery charcoal from sugar maple trees. We actually burn these trees down to about 99 point something percent pure carbon, grind them up and pack. These are 10 feet tall vats. And if you see those little sprinkler system, drop by drop, Jack Daniels off the still is dripped over this charcoal, and it takes about 2 or 3 days to get to the bottom of this charcoal mellowing vat. And at that point, it's now Tennessee whiskey as it goes into the barrel. Adds no color, adds no flavor. Charcoal removes. Okay, so what does it remove from Jack Daniels? We're 80% corn. It removes a little bit of that corn aroma, corn oils, fatty acids, and it really does make Jack have that unique Jack Daniels flavor profile, which we're going to find out in a second. Now, the best and worst analogy I can give you is think about a Snickers bar. Okay, everyone knows what a Snickers bar tastes like. If you take the peanuts out of a Snickers bar, you have a Milky Way. completely different flavor profile,
Yep.
and you added nothing. All you did was remove something. So when you remove things from Jack Daniels through charcoal filtering, it allows for other flavors to shine. Okay, and that's where you get some of these notes. You guys do a lot of wine tastings. So you hear people talk about things in the wine that aren't actually in the wine. That comes from the process of making wine. It's the same
Yep.
for Jack Daniels. It's yeast, it's the water, it's the barrel, it's the grains that we use. All of that, it's the land, it's the nature, it's all the things that affect it while you're making it. But there's nothing added to it that would give you any of these flavors. And by removing some of these flavors, it's allowing for flavors that might not have shown to really shine. And I hate,
Can we show everybody the charcoal guys?
yeah.
I,
Darren and Tracy.
I want to do that. Let me see if I can get this up on the screen for everyone to see. But there are they up there?
Yep.
All right. So these are the two guys. There's only two guys in all of
Yep.
Jack Daniels who can make the charcoal that filters the whiskey.
Yeah. So Darren and Tracy, that's their job. They make the charcoal, they burn the ricks. You see one burning in their window in the reflection, and they make it. They fill those charcoal vats. They empty the vats. They clean them. They know when to change them. You know, we taste every vat, all the whiskey that's coming off. We make sure the charcoal is still active enough to do its job, and when it's not, we redistill the whiskey that's on charcoal that's not helping, and then put it through a new batch of charcoal.
Can
And
we show everybody the where them burning the?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So let's go to that because that is a pretty awesome sight in and of itself with the ricks burning. So
Yep. So
yeah.
that's where Jack makes the charcoal. That's about 30 or 40 feet in front of where those two guys were sitting. So we take these sugar maple staves, build like this giant Jenga board, and it's actually sprayed down with new make 140 proof Jack Daniels. That way there's no extra flavor added. Like if we use gasoline or some type of agent, that could potentially get into the whiskey. So we use Jack Daniels to burn the wood.
Right.
Someone asked about gluten-free. Good question. So all distilled spirits, I asked our distiller this, all distilled spirits are technically gluten-free if you're on a gluten-free diet. If you have celiac, I would ask your doctor because I think trace amounts could possibly get through, and I don't know what you would need to affect someone that is really negatively affected by gluten. But if you're just on a gluten-free diet, like my wife, she's never had an adverse effect to any distilled spirit. It doesn't really live through distillation, but if it's a medical thing, I would ask a doctor.
What are some of the other images that we can help sort of paint the picture here of the process? I mean, obviously the charcoal is huge.
Yeah, I mean, we saw the water, we see the charcoal, we saw them. You have a picture of the guys that used to make it back in Jack's day.
What about you have the actual dripping
Yeah.
of the
The
water,
whiskey over the charcoal,
the
yeah.
whiskey over the charcoal. Let me pull that up.
So while you're doing that, someone asked about the ingredients of Jack Daniels, and I'm happy to give you our secret recipe, which is 80% corn, 8% rye, 12% malted barley. And that's the same grain bill of almost every single thing we make at Jack Daniels. And why that's important, when you hear someone say 8, 9 or more malted barley, so that's the whiskey dripping straight off the still through this quote unquote sprinkler system, and right underneath those drops is the charcoal.
And this is already the drips you see here. This is already a distilled spirit of sorts.
Yeah, that's fermented and distilled Jack Daniels. At that point, before it goes on the charcoal, if we put that in a bottle, you would call that White Dog or moonshine at that point.
Right.
And then once it goes through the charcoal filtration, it would still be, now it'd be Tennessee White Dog or Tennessee moonshine. Then it goes in the barrel. And someone asked about barrels. Yes. Not only do we age all of Jack Daniels just like bourbon in new charred white American oak barrels. The barrel will give any aged spirit, any aged whiskey that you've ever had, 100% of its color, all comes from the barrel, 100%. And depending on which distiller you ask, or the process of that barrel being made, the barrel will impart at least 50, sometimes up to 70% of the flavor in that whiskey. So once you're 50 and above, that barrel is the most important ingredient to the flavor of your whiskey. So it's so important to Jack Daniel's that we're the only major supplier on the planet that makes our own barrels. We own 2 cooperages. That's where you make barrels. We own 5 stave mills. That's where the trees come in with the bark still on them. We cut those trees down and make them into the staves you see on the barrel, send them to our cooperage, and then they raise the barrels by hand. We've been doing it since the 50s.
And is it oak?
Yeah, white oak.
White oak.
White oak, American white oak.
Do you reuse the barrels, or are they used one time only?
They're only, so by law, which I didn't mention earlier, in bourbon and Tennessee whiskey, in any aged whiskey in America, basically, well, bourbon in Tennessee, different types of bourbon, but if you age in a barrel, you can only use it once. That's an American whiskey law for bourbon and Tennessee whiskey. So once we age to full maturity, we have to get rid of the barrel. But Jack Daniel's forever has, been going green before it was hip to be green. So we reuse, recycle, repurpose everything we possibly can. So our barrels, the biggest secondary market for our barrels is other distilleries.
Mm-hmm.
So the law in America for bourbon in Tennessee is once. Scotland, Ireland, Canada, Japan, they don't have those laws. Mexico, the Caribbean. So when they're aging their spirits, they don't have to use new barrels. And it's not better or worse. It's the flavor they're going for. We
Right.
want all those big flavors from the barrel after that first char. Think about a tea bag, right? When you make tea in the morning with an Earl Grey or whatever is your favorite, you have a robust tea to sip on. If you forgot to buy more tea and you reuse that tea bag, that second tea isn't quite as strong. But those other producers aren't looking for the same notes we're looking for. We want the heavy caramel and vanillas and toffees. We want that oak. That's American whiskey. That's not Scotch. That's not rum. So that's the biggest secondary market. There's 50 local artisans that there's like 50 artisans that take our barrels, make rocking chairs, they make benches, they make dog beds, they make dartboards, they make anything out of these barrels. And so they get repurposed all the time. Our charcoal lasts about 8 months, 6 to 8 months in those big vats. Then a lot of times we sell them to pellet companies. They push them together and make Jack Daniel's grilling pellets. Jack Daniel's, as big as you say we were earlier, has less than a 1% carbon footprint. We recycle, like our grains, for example, I call it farm to farm. So they come into the distillery as kernels, we mill them, we ferment them, we distill them, all that good stuff. And those empty slop after we distill, all the alcohol is out. We sell it to local farmers for nothing, and they come and bring it back to their farm and feed their cattle. So it started on the farm, goes back to the farm.
Goes back to the earth. By the way, you're being encouraged to take.
I hear. Let's do this. All right. So the first thing we're going to taste is Gentleman Jack, and since you guys are wine, experts, let me just give you 2 quick pieces of alcohol tasting that's a little bit different than wine. We're going to start at 80 proof and go up. Wine lives in the mid-teens, right? So when you take that big aroma of a big wine glass, swirl it around, you can just take it in on your nose. You shouldn't do that with alcohol because that could affect your palate. What I suggest, put your nose in the glass and then breathe in through your mouth. It will smell and give you all the sensory that you want without actually affecting your palate. The second thing is we just had a cocktail. Take a little sip Let it coat your mouth. Take a second sip. That's where the flavor lives.
Good suggestion. Clear the palate.
And what better to clear it with than some good Tennessee whiskey?
Now, how would you to the uninitiated, how would you describe the distinction between the Gentleman Jack and the Black Label, the traditional?
So this is what's crazy, and this is what's really cool about making all your own whiskey, not sourcing anything. When you control the process, you control how you can vary it with process. So Gentleman Jack is made 100% like Jack Daniels. Same grains, same yeast, same water, same barrels. After we go through 10 feet of that charcoal, they both go in the barrels and mature till they're fully ready to be whiskey. Jack Daniels, Black Label, goes in the bottle, travels around the world. Gentleman Jack goes through about 3 more feet of charcoal. So it's double charcoal mellowed.
Wow.
And what that does, you remember, it's after the barrel. The barrel is adding all of this oak and all of these bitter notes that coming from the barrel. Because Gentleman Jack goes through a little bit more charcoal, when you taste it, you notice it hits the front and middle of your palate. But by the time it gets to the back of your palate, that's where the bitter and oak flavors come. It just disappears. It's not like one of those whiskeys that just lingers in the back of your throat, like a big, bold, high proof whiskey. Gentleman Jack was made to be more approachable. It came out in the 80s. And in the 80s, as you might know, American whiskey was not doing well. Scotch was doing okay. Vodka was killing it. And people wanted these neutral, approachable, other flavors can help kind of spirits. So our distiller said, you know what, let's make maybe a Jack Daniels that might encourage someone that doesn't think they like whiskey to try whiskey. So Jack Daniels made Gentleman Jack, and it really worked. People really love it. And it's not even just beginner whiskey drinkers. It becomes whiskey drinkers that have tried it all and like, oh, wow, Gentleman Jack is the only double mellowed whiskey in the world. I want to try that. Or it's great in cocktails because it doesn't fight for attention. It doesn't say, look at me, look at me. It plays well with others. So it's a great whiskey on its own. It's great for cocktails. And it really is one of those unique, only of its kind on the market.
That is awesome. All right. So what's our next of these expressions of Jack Daniels? What's our next one?
So we're going to go all the way to the other end of the spectrum. 10 years after Gentleman Jack came out, people were craving bigger, bolder whiskeys again. They wanted higher proof. They wanted more flavor. So we started doing single barrel whiskeys. And a lot of what single barrel is in the name. Okay. For Jack Daniels, Gentleman Jack, we take about 140, 150 barrels. We marry them all together and we bottle that. And that ensures consistency of color and flavor. So if you crack a bottle of Jack in Tennessee or Taiwan, it's a bottle of Jack. Single barrel, the nuances of each barrel really come into play here. Now, we don't put age statements on any of our whiskey at this time because we have tasters. They know when Jack is ready. Nothing is less than 4 years. But we have averages, but it's really done by taste. And single barrel, only about 1 in 100 barrels we pull become a single barrel. And that's not to say the other 99 had a problem. That just means they don't stand out on their own as something we want to say, this is what represents single barrel. We're looking for certain things to be in a single barrel, whether it's a highly vanilla and caramel leaning toward whiskey or really oaky. We're riding right in that middle. But if it's something that we don't feel like represents what our distillers and tasters want for single barrel, we'll put that into a batch because when you have 150 barrels, you're going to get that Jack note. But for one barrel only, it really has to be pulled off that shelf and be like, that can live like a single barrel whiskey should live. So these are aged on average about 2 years longer than Old Number 7. And what that means is 2 more heat cycles, 2 more summers of getting flavor out of that wood. And so it's not just oak, it's all the caramels and toffees and that banana note you might get in Jack Daniels, all these flavors that come into play. The other thing is all the barrels for single barrel mostly come from the high floors or the barrel house is high up on the hill. And I hate to bring science on a fun Wednesday afternoon, but as everybody knows, hot air rises. So the top of our barrel houses, which are 7 stories high, not 7, there's 7 floors, could be 25 degrees warmer in the summer than in the winter from the low floor. So if it's 100 degrees on the bottom floor of our barrel house, it might be 125 on the top floor. So that wood is expanding more. That whiskey is getting deeper into the wood and pulling out more flavor. All right. And it's also bottled at 94 proof.
Yeah, I noticed that straight away. Like this is, old number 7, Jack Daniels, is 40% alcohol. This is 47%.
Right. And what that does, all of our whiskey goes into the barrel at 125 proof. And then over the course of aging, water evaporates and the alcohol content rises. So when we pull a barrel off the shelf and empty it like we do now with our single barrel proof, we don't proof it down at all. So if it comes out at 134.9, that's how we bottle it. All that means is we add less water. The less water you add, the more alcohol content.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't just mean it's going to be more, wow, that's so strong. What it does mean, it's going to be a different consistency in your mouth. There's going to be a bigger viscosity. There's going to be more flavor from those 2 extra years and also from those high floors. So I'll answer that question about single barrel tasting different, but for now, I don't want to get yelled at again. So let's toast a little single barrel. And if you have any Gentleman Jack left, you can really see the difference between something that's made to be really approachable and not oaky, and then the big bold.
So this is going to be the most structured, biggest flavor profile in the portfolio. Is that right?
Yes-ish. So we also have a single barrel proof, which is just bottled at whatever came out of the barrel. So it could be anywhere from 125 and up. I've seen them as high as 139, and that's going to even have more robust flavors and much more of a viscous feel in your mouth because there's less water. Now, someone asked me, does every single barrel taste different? Yes and no. As I mentioned, we have 9 master tasters. One of them touches every single barrel that becomes a single barrel, and they're looking for 3 distinct profiles. So while this barrel over here might be super vanilla and caramel, the barrel over there might be super vanilla and caramel, and I don't believe I would be able to tell the difference if I was at your house on Monday and sipped a vanilla caramel expression of single barrel, and on Wednesday I was at someone else's house and it was the same profile. I might side by side maybe, but 2 days apart, no way. But an oaky version of single barrel versus a vanilla caramel banana note, you would be like, oh, this is a much oakier version of single barrel. So, and that's when you go to Jack, you can buy a barrel. So if you're a bar, you can buy a barrel, we'll bottle it for you, and then you can have something you selected. So if
That's
you really
cool.
want, a big, bold, high oak whiskey, you can go pick one that fits that profile. Or if you want to go get a real smooth vanilla caramel silky whiskey, you can pick that, and then you'll have about 240 bottles to.
So now this single barrel select it's in national distribution,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
How, I mean, if you had a bottle you bought in May,
Right.
might it taste different than one you bought in September? Because
it could, yeah. If the one you bought in September has a more oaky finish, and it makes people really enjoy seeking out different, what I always tell people, if you went out to, I don't even know the stores in New York, but if you went out and bought a bottle of single barrel and loved it, like, oh my God, that's the best one I've ever had, this is my favorite, I would run back to the store and check the numbers and
get
see if you can't.
the same lot number, right?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
tells you exactly where it was pulled from. So, the store probably bought a case. It's probably from the same barrel. So,
Yeah.
you might
Get
want to
some
try to go.
more.
Yeah.
That's really cool. And then did number 7 used to be 86 proof?
Used to be 90 proof.
Really?
So in Sinatra's day, it was 90. It went to 86, and then it went to 80. And, for the most part, it was met with high fanfare of going lower, people were looking for that at the time. Had a couple purists that weren't happy, but it didn't slow down Jack. But because now people are really, American whiskey is the fastest growing category. Vodka's still bigger, but whiskey grows faster. So people are looking for all these different expressions. So we make it a little bit more approachable, a little bit bolder. We're going to go into a new thing in a second. So we have a lot of different Jack on the market to hopefully meet everyone's needs, right? We can't expect everyone on this call loves the same whiskey, right? But we can hope that we make something that someone loves. And, that's the goal for our distillers. That's the challenge. What else is new? What can we innovate?
No,
You like
that's awesome.
Sinatra, he drank 90 proof Jack. The way he drank it, he drank 2 fingers of whiskey. That's how they used to call it. They wouldn't measure it. They'd say 2 fingers, fill it up to 2 fingers, 3 ice cubes, and a dash of water. And usually in higher proof whiskey, I agree. I put an ice cube on it. I put a little water on it because it opens up a lot of flavors. It's like a wine sitting. It starts to, you get different aromas, you get different flavor. Usually when you put water on a whiskey, I don't know if he would have done that at 80 proof Jack. He might have just drank it neat. Who knows? But Sinatra really, like, when you think about the growth of Jack, that clip you played in the beginning, it's the Nectar of the Gods, baby. So he first went on stage in around 1954 and said that and told the audience he loves Jack Daniels. The very next year, our sales doubled, and the sales kept going up and up and up to the point where Jack Daniels Black Label Old Number 7 was on allocation, meaning just like Pappy Van Winkle today, Jack Daniels was on allocation for 20 years. We didn't catch up to supply and demand until 79,
Wow.
which is crazy when you think about it.
Amazing. Yeah, yeah.
Does anyone know on the chat who introduced Frank Sinatra to Jack Daniels? And while you're typing, I'll answer your question. My favorite Jack Daniels is Jack Daniels Old Number 7. That's what I drink the most. If I'm home alone and I'm gonna have one whiskey, I might do a single barrel on a rock or neat and just sip it. It's warm me up as the winter comes around. But at 94 proof, if I'm out having a couple drinks responsibly, I like the Jack's 80 proof, and I can have a few, and it's not going to give you that same punch you're going to get from some high proof whiskeys. Now the question was who introduced, and I only saw Sammy Davis Jr. and Dean Martin. Both those answers are incorrect. So much like I was born and bred on Sinatra, and I kind of man crushed him a little bit, he also idolized people. And someone that Sinatra idolized was Humphrey Bogart. And it used to be Jackie Gleason, Jason. We, the head of the Sinatra Enterprises, recently found out that is not true. So there was a concert from '82 at Caesar's Palace, and Sinatra himself was singing and says, "Do you guys want to know how I came to find Jack Daniels?" And he was at Humphrey Bogart's house, who he really dug, and it was a dinner party. And after dinner, Bogey said to Sinatra, "What do you want for a nightcap?" He's like, "I don't care, whatever." And then Bogey says, "Well, then we're having Jack Daniels." And Sinatra said, "What the hell is Jack Daniels?" And he goes, "You're going to find out." And, literally when it touched his lips, he was rarely ever seen without a glass of Jack Daniels on the rocks. He loved it so much that when he was laid to rest, per his will, there was a bottle of Old Number 7 in his coffin. Just
That's
crazy.
awesome. That's awesome.
Let's get to some rye, because this is the newest thing that we have at Jack Daniels. So for the past 100 years, we've been using that same grain bill I told you about: 80% corn, 8% rye, and 12% malted barley. Now, as a law of bourbon and Tennessee whiskey, you have to be at least 51% corn. Then you can mess around with the other grains. But 51% corn has to be the start. Rye follows all the same rules we talked about. The only difference is the grain bill. It has to be at least 51% rye. And what kind of difference does that make? Think about rye bread versus cornbread. Rye bread's a little bit drier. It might have not as spicy like hot food, but a spice note, peppery. Whereas cornbread's a little bit sweeter, almost like dessert with a little bit of butter on it. So rye, very similar in its in the bottle. It's a little bit peppery spice. It's not quite as sweet on the finish, but it is Jack Daniels. We use the same yeast, the same water, and we do charcoal mellow the rye. However, it does not go through 10 feet. Our distillers found out that charcoal mellowing rye really pulled out some of the rye notes you want in a rye. So it only goes through that second process of Gentleman Jack, about 3 feet, just to kind of polish the edges a little bit. So this rye is 90 proof, okay, and it's a straight rye, so it's minimum 4 years in the barrel, and um, it's unique amongst rye in this. Most ryes that you've had are in two categories. All in rye, 95 or 100% rye, only grain. All you're getting is a big bold spice. Again, not better or worse, just taste. Or just barely rye at 51, 52, 53%. We make a rye, Woodford Reserve, Old Forester, that are just over the legal limit. Okay, so other things are really influencing the flavor. Our distillers were like, you know what? Jack always did things a little bit differently. He dressed a little bit differently. Our bottle's square, that's always different. There's enough ryes of those categories. Let's try something new. So this is 70% rye. And the hope was that meeting right in the middle, this would be a rye that would be good on its own to sip, which most ryes are used in cocktails, but just enough bold spice to also work in a cocktail. So cheers to the new Jack rye, new-ish.
Cheers.
Cheers.
I have a question about rye. I was recently out at an event, an outdoor event, so socially distanced, safe, and somebody I was with ordered a rye Manhattan, and I'd never had one, so I got one as well, and I liked it, but it's definitely a different mode. Like, how would you describe how rye, and like a rye like this, is in a cocktail, like a classic like a Manhattan, versus the more standard, you in a Manhattan you'd have I think oftentimes it'd be a bourbon, right?
Yeah. So oftentimes now. So what's funny is, when I started drinking, rye was grandpa, right? No one drank rye.
Right.
It really was, Canadian rye, which isn't really the rye like American rye. So back then, rye wasn't something anyone ever really reached for. I bartended forever, and the first 15 years of bartending, I don't think I served any rye that wasn't Canadian. When the cocktail revolution happened and bartenders started finding all these old cocktail books, they were very surprised to find out that some of their favorite whiskey cocktails were made with rye or brandy, not bourbon. Because back in the day, rye was the thing. Rye was something that was produced a lot in America. A lot of the old whiskeys were rye, and that's what people were used to drinking. There's a lot of Canadian rye, especially during Prohibition. So a lot of these cocktails were rye based. And then when bourbon became such a thing, everyone kind of switched to bourbon. Okay. And so that bartender, whoever made that drink or ordered it, that really is probably the more traditional way to make some of these cocktails.
Well, and I think AC points out in the chat that Manhattans were traditionally rye based.
Yeah. So, and most cocktails that we use whiskey in now were rye based. They just all kind of switched. And now people are rediscovering rye again. So when we decided to make rye, it took us a minute because we make 100% of everything we do. We don't outsource anything. So it took us about 6 years to get a rye out once we decided we wanted to make it. But this is the newest offering, and it's the first time in 100 years that the grain bill at Jack Daniel's changed, where we use a different recipe of grains to make a whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
In Jack's day and after Prohibition, there were some different products that came out of the distillery. His nephew made some liqueurs and some brandies because after Prohibition, people needed to get stuff done fast, and whiskey is not a fast thing. Even before, what's crazy is before Prohibition, charcoal mellowing is now the Tennessee whiskey thing. Prior to Prohibition, when Nearest Green taught Jack, other distilleries in different cities. 70 is the answer to that question.
70%.
70% rye.
Yeah.
There were other distilleries, even in Kentucky, that were making charcoal mellowed whiskey. Because if you think about it, charcoal mellowing is almost like giving a kickstart to barrel aging. Because when you char the inside of a barrel, it has a similar effect. By doing the charcoal mellowing, it kind of gives you a little bit of a jump on that barrel. And a lot of people were doing it. After Prohibition, no one did it except Jack's nephew said, you know what? Uncle Jack always charcoal mellowed. We're not going to change that. And it became the Tennessee thing because they really wanted to keep what was unique about Jack Daniels. And the government fought Jack's nephew. They sent a note that said, you're making bourbon. You have to put bourbon on your label. And his nephew sent a letter back saying, we're not making bourbon, we make Tennessee whiskey. This is why. This would have helped a lot if we had phones and Zoom back then. But he finally went to the government with a sample of Jack Daniels, not charcoal mellowed, and a sample of Jack Daniels charcoal mellowed, and said, you tell me these are bourbon. And they said, you know what? It smells and tastes different enough. You can keep calling it Tennessee whiskey. So his nephew really fought to keep that. Now that statue behind you,
Yep.
That's Jack Daniel. His nephew built the original statue that looked very similar. However, his nephew built it to scale. Jack Daniel, big heart, big mind, big presence, petite man. He was 5'2" with a size 4 shoe, and the statue was built to scale. So all that weight of the metal for the statue was resting on a size 4 shoe, and it kept toppling over. So they had to rebuild the statue with maybe a size 7 to kind of be a better base.
Yeah, that's awesome. By the way, I've been meaning to ask you a question because I was fascinated with his history and his story. He died in what, 1908, you said?
No, 1911.
1911. And then Prohibition came,
Right before that. Prohibition in Tennessee happened in Jack's lifetime.
It happened in his lifetime. Did he see the company become something big, or was it still a relatively small enterprise when he died?
Jack was the man in his town, in his county. He was a successful whiskey maker, and he was a very generous man. He was a very giving person. Do you have that picture of Jack and Nearest's grandson?
Yeah, I want to put that up actually.
So, in Jack's lifetime, if you were having trouble on your farm and you had a bad crop season, people went to Jack for help, and he bailed a lot of people out, knowing full well he would never get paid back. He used to throw parties at his house all the time for everybody. He was a very, very generous man. He took care of people. So this picture is really unique for many reasons. One, it's one of the very few pictures we have of Jack, which is the man wearing the white hat with the salt and pepper beard and mustache and the vest. The gentleman to his left is George Green. That's Nearest Green's son. So when Jack bought the land in Lynchburg and moved his still from Dan Call's Creek, where him and Nearest made whiskey, to Lynchburg, he wanted Nearest to come with him. But Nearest was older. I think he might have been 70 at that point, and didn't want to work anymore. He made his money. He wanted to stay. Dan Call fought in the Civil War and was injured, and he wanted to stay and help out with Dan. So he kind of lived out his golden years on the farm. And his two sons, George being one of them, were Jack's first hires in Lynchburg. This is a distillery employee. That's funny. This is a distillery photo of Jack and his employees. So what's super unique, this is late 18, maybe early 1900s. Right next to the owner is an African-American man. That is unheard of in that era. And that's the value Jack put on people. There's a woman named Fawn Weaver who's exhaustively done research on the history of Jack and Nearest Green, and she now owns the Nearest Green Distillery in honor of Nearest. And she said in her research, she really found that Jack paid people for the job they did, not for the color of their skin. And that's a really great thing to hear about the founder of the company you work for, that even in the South, in a very turbulent time, he just did things the Jack way.
No, that's a great story. This has been amazing. I don't know if we want to do any trivia or if there's any final Q&A. I do want to be mindful that we set things for 7 to 8 p.m. and I know I'm getting ready to make another Sunset Strip for myself here at home. But any last questions for ET? And also ET, do you want to hit anybody up with another trivia?
Yeah, I have some prizes to give away. So
all right, let's do that.
Let's do this. So the first one I'm going to give away, this is brand new Jack Daniel's cocktail bitters. Okay.
Wow.
And these just came out during COVID, unfortunately, but I worked on these for about 4 years, and these are made in an aromatic style to work. They'll work with any whiskey, but they're really made to work with the flavors of Jack Daniel's. So there's some parallel flavors in here, like oak and some fruit notes. And then there's some, flavors that complement Jack Daniel's, like some dark fruits and some ginger and things like that. So really great in Jack Daniel's cocktails, old fashions, Manhattans, Sazeracs, tiki drinks, all that fun stuff. So in order to get me to mail you a bottle of unopened, these are opened, a bottle of unopened brand new Jack Daniel's bitters, the first one to type in this answer: what was Frank Sinatra's favorite color? Frank Sinatra's favorite color. Blue, red, blue, 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 green, black.
Now we're guessing.
Yeah, well, someone's going to guess it eventually. Not purple. Orange. All right, Jason. Orange is correct. Orange was Sinatra's favorite color. And if you look at if you can find a color picture, sometimes you wear some things that are orange or orange accents. And then the Sinatra Select, which we also make, there's some orange accents on that bottle on the box just to kind of nod to Frank. The next prize I'm going to give away, which I can't show you, is a mystery box, which is why you're not seeing it, but it's going to be full of really fun Jack swag and some things you won't find in stores. So this will be a question about Jack Daniel himself, and that will be, it's multiple choice. How many countries do we make Jack Daniels in? Is it 6, 15, 1, or 5?
We got some pretty divergent numbers here.
Make, yes. So the majority is winning here, 1 place. So all that whiskey that you talked about earlier that we make all comes from Lynchburg, Tennessee. We've only ever, that's not entirely true. During Prohibition, his nephew tried to regain some of the magic in St. Louis, but it didn't quite work out because the land's just not the same before it went U.S. Prohibition. But Jack Daniels is only made in Lynchburg, Tennessee. And when you really think about it, it's crazy that a tiny little town that's only about 600 people makes all the Jack Daniels that's sold in about 172 countries around the world. Crazy, crazy, crazy. So that, whoever got that, we have to look back at the chat. Whoever was the first one to say 1 is the winner.
I will tell you right now that the winner is Brian.
Congratulations, Brian. And the very last question will get you this limited edition item. So Sinatra's family came to us a couple years ago, and they were cleaning out something of Frank's and found his flask, the one he had made for himself. And on that flask, he had engraved Old Jack, O-L-E Jack. And on the outside of the flask, it was a leather case with his initials, FSA, Francis Albert Sinatra. And they said, does this mean anything to you guys? We're like, yes. And we reproduced a very limited quantity of these Sinatra flasks. And I have a couple left from that run. And here is
Wow, look at that.
the Frank Sinatra flask. And even when you open it, there's 4 stainless steel cups so you can pour out a little shot for yourself or your friends. If you can tell me who coined the term Rat Pack.
Ooh. That's simpler than it's harder than it sounds. It sounds simple.
Had a hopper, not a bad guess.
Sammy Davis, somebody said. Brett. Linda. Anybody else? Bobby Darin. Wow.
All right. So the answer, I gave a clue earlier. Bogart's mom. I don't know if you call Lauren Bacall mother, but it was Lauren Bacall. So legend has it, and the legend by this is in Lauren Bacall's book. There was a party at their house, and at the wee hours of the end tail end of this party, she took a look around at everyone, and she said, "Will you look at this goddamn Rat Pack?" So Bogey thought that was cute and funny, and ironically, he called his group of friends the Rat Pack. And Bogey really had the first Rat Pack. Sinatra was in the original Rat Pack with Bogey, but it was Bogey and his friends and Lauren Bacall. And there was Judy Garland was in the Rat Pack originally, Bacall, Marilyn Monroe, Ava Gardner, all this stuff. And it wasn't until Bogey passed, Sinatra almost married Lauren Bacall until they realized they only really had the love of Bogey in common. And then Frank took over the Rat Pack, and that's the Rat Pack we know, because Bogey was a little bit more of a homebody than Frank. So he, Sinatra took it to other limits. They never actually liked being called the Rat Pack. They called themselves the Summit.
Lauren Bacall was no wilting flower, and so spoken like a true native New York gal. Like
right.
she called out those Rat Pack guys in the.
She also called out Sinatra in her book and said, "I drank more Jack Daniels than Sinatra."
Listen, if there was a fight, I would put my money on Lauren Bacall.
Well, Sinatra was a boxer, and so is his dad. So
well, I guess that's true.
Might be a toss-up.
Yeah.
But look, at the end of the day, to bookend your reading the last page to the first page, yeah, Jack Daniels is the biggest selling American whiskey in the world. And if Jack was alive today, I really do believe he'd be proud of that. I think he'd be more proud of the fact it's made exactly the same way he made it in the same place he used to make it. Not much has really changed over the years. And, bigger isn't always bad. Small isn't always good. It's really what you like. I can't make anyone on this call love Jack the way I love it. I can only tell you why I love it, what Jack is, what it means in the bottle and outside of the bottle in pop culture. And to me, it's one of the few icons left of America. So I'm really thankful you guys brought me on and let me hopefully give you some things about Jack you might not have known yesterday.
This has been great, E.T. Truly a pleasure and a privilege. And for our first virtual tasting with spirits, I mean, you've set the bar really high. So thank you so much for being a part of this. And we want to also call out a special thanks to our partners at Citi. The Citi card member group, an amazing team, and they support our adventures in virtual tastings. So thank you to Citi. And E.T., let's do this again, and let's do another. Somebody said in the chat, like, let's have. Are you going to do this again? Let's plan something in the near term future where we make a couple of more cocktails and we delve a little further into some of this awesome history.
Sounds good to me. I'm in. I'll have to twist my arm.
Excellent. By the way, I want to give a shout out to Sergio, who's tuned in from Brazil. So that's pretty awesome.
That's great. That's awesome.
All right.
Thanks
well, thank you, E.T. Take good care. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Stay safe, stay good, and we'll see you on the next virtual tasting experience here.
All right, everyone. Rock on. Thank you so much.
Good night.